Hi guys, so I'm sure you're all aware by now who Ben Shapiro is. He is of course the editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire and is one of the most entrancing speakers you will ever listen to on issues of social justice and political correctness. Since my Crowder video, I've had a few people ask me what I think of speakers like Shapiro and Yiannopoulos, the assumption of course being that since I'm transgender, I must hate these guys for the views they express on transgenderism. Indeed, most people are surprised to learn that I have a lot of respect for Ben Shapiro despite disagreeing with him on a variety of different topics. I have quite a bit to say about his views on transgenderism, and the clips I'm going to show you here are from a lecture he gave for the Young Americas Foundation. And he spends about 5 minutes sharing his opinion on the transgender issue, so let's see what he has to say.
They had me on this. They had me on the show, and they decided that they were going to seat me directly next to a transgender woman, meaning a man who is delusional and thinks he's a woman.
The person he's talking about is Zoe Tur, a reporter that most of you are probably only aware of because she threatened to assault Shapiro in front of a camera and an audience, the exact threat being that Shapiro would be going home in an ambulance. Evidently, Tur is a nasty, vile arsehole, and I don't intend on defending them, but I do want to consider what Shapiro has just said. He said a transgender woman is a man who thinks he's a woman. So let's pretend for a minute that Shapiro and I are having a more civil discussion than the one he had with Tur, and that he refers to me as a woman who thinks she's a man, that I'm delusional. Except I am living as a man. That is not a delusion on my part. That is a fact. I am not biologically male. I have never claimed to be. But I am living as, accepted as, socially and legally, a man. I use the male's restroom without issue. In my day-to-day interactions with people, I'm referred to as and treated as a man. For all intents and purposes, I am a man because that is how society sees me and that is how I live my life. That is the reality for all passing trans people. To call us delusional is simply not true. There is a difference between living as a man or a woman and being biologically male or female. Biology you cannot change, but with medical transition you can change how you present yourself so convincingly that you're able to live as and be accepted as a member of the opposite sex. This is where Shapiro, as much as I admire his intellect, is caught in this net of ignorance that people like Crowder, Yiannopoulos and McInnes are prone to get tangled in when they think of trans people. They think of either regressive trenders who make no effort to pass, who don't even tend to medically transition, or they think of older trans women who do not pass and who tend to be very far-leaning on the political spectrum, probably because only the far left would actually see them and treat them as women, let's be real. So, do you see a man or a woman? You see a woman, right? Correct. This is a cisgender woman. Do you see a man or a woman? You see a woman, don't you? It doesn't matter that she's butch, you still see a woman. Do you see a man or a woman? You see a man who's trying to look like a woman, but you still register a man in your mind because they don't pass. Do you see a man or a woman? You see a woman, don't you? It doesn't matter that she's biologically male, you register her in your mind as a woman because she passes. This woman who lives as and is accepted socially and legally as a woman is not delusional when she says that she's a woman. She would be delusional if she believed she was biologically female, but reasonable trans people come to terms with the fact that they are not biologically what they are socially. As it happens, this is what causes intense dysphoria for a lot of trans people, because we know you can't change it.
Why is the public humoring a delusion? It's not kind to the mentally ill. It's terrible for the mentally ill. As somebody whose grandfather was schizophrenic, it would have been really, really quite terrible if the entire society had said to him, you know what, Nate, you're totally right, the radio is talking to you. Right? It wouldn't have been beneficial to him. It was much more beneficial to him that he was institutionalized, given lithium, and then healed, basically, and was able to live a decent life.
Then it's a good thing that suffering from schizophrenia and suffering from gender dysphoria are two completely different things then. This is what I mean when I say that Shapiro is ignorant when it comes to this condition, and I know a fair number of you listening are probably fans of his, but just because you're a fan of someone does not mean that you cannot disagree with them. Like I said, I respect Shapiro, I watch a lot of his stuff, but you can bet your arse that I'm going to call him out when I perceive something that he says is completely ignorant. Schizophrenia is a severe long-term type of psychosis that causes a range of different psychological symptoms, including hallucinations and delusions, and is treated with a combination of medication and therapy. In most cases, this will be antipsychotic meds and cognitive behavioural therapy. Gender dysphoria is a condition where a person will experience distress because there is a mismatch between their biological sex and their gender identity. Symptoms can include a strong desire to be rid of the physical signs of your sex, such as breasts, body hair or muscle definition, and or a strong desire to change the genitalia of your biological sex to resemble that of your preferred or desired sex. It is treated with hormone therapy and any form of medical procedure aimed to aid in your ability to pass as the opposite sex, including sexual reassignment surgery. You see the difference? A schizophrenic person may believe that the radio is talking to them. So you give them antipsychotic meds and assure them that the radio is not actually talking to them. A transgender person does not believe that they are actually the opposite sex, but they wish they were. A transgender man's doctor will not tell them that they're biologically male, but will instead monitor his transition, that is, his ability to pass as a man with the aid of hormones, etc., while still acknowledging and treating their patient's body as biologically female, because it is biologically female. Ben Shapiro seems to be under the impression that all transgender people genuinely believe that they are biologically the sex they identify as. This is an assumption made by many on the right, and it's simply not true.
You know, the idea that transgender surgery accomplishes anything for people who are quote-unquote transgender is nonsense. The suicide rates are precisely the same before and after the surgery, and they are both in excess of 40%. Which is unbelievably high.
This study was carried out back in 1998 by the Institute of Clinical Neuroscience in Sweden and examined factors that are predictive of regret in sex reassignment. It used 218 subjects, so a small pool, but this was 2 decades ago, and it found that only 3.8% of the patients who were sex reassigned regretted the measures taken. They concluded that their results showed that the outcome of sex reassignment has improved over the years. And certainly as advances have been made over the last 2 decades, the ability to be sexually reassigned more convincingly has increased. This 2014 analysis asked 254 patients who had undergone male to female gender reassignment to fill out a questionnaire about their subjective post-operative satisfaction. Only 119 patients filled out and returned the questionnaire, at a mean of roughly 5 years after their surgery, but the very high rates of subjective satisfaction of those who did fill out the form indicates that gender reassignment surgery can be greatly beneficial. These findings must be interpreted with caution, of course, because fewer than half of the questionnaires were returned. But the reason why I included this study with such a limitation is because, while it doesn't prove that reassignment helps everyone, it does prove that it helps some people. This is an important factor when debating with the right because they have the tendency to use the high suicide rates as a reason why reassignment surgery shouldn't be recommended at all. I am not denying that the suicide rates are disturbing and very high, and I've spoken out in multiple videos that I have a problem with transgenderism becoming a trend because it will only increase the suicide rates when these kids grow up and realise too late that they were never trans to begin with. The far left likes to pretend that transition is always the answer. The far right likes to pretend that transition is never the answer. I think the evidence shows us that it should be dealt with on a case-by-case basis because sometimes transition is the answer and sometimes it isn't. And someone as intelligent as Ben Shapiro should know this.
The idea that society is responsible for transgender suicide is absolute garbage. It is not true. Okay, the fact is that even they've done polls of this. There was a poll from the Anderson School at UCLA, and they found that even transgender people who say they're not questioned about being transgendered, they have exactly the same rate of suicidality, meaning that this is a mental illness, because that rate of suicidality is so far beyond anything that has ever been experienced in any population of humans ever. Seriously, the only comparable rate of suicide to the transgender community today is Jews living under Nazi German rule. That is the only time in human history that there has been that rate of suicide. So I promise you, transgenders are not being treated like Jews under Nazi German rule, so it clearly is not societal impact that is making people suicidal.
Just because transgender people are not being treated like Jews under Nazi Germany doesn't mean society has nothing to do with why individual transgender people kill themselves. Again, anyone who's been watching my videos for a while now will know that I'm very sceptical of the idea that society is responsible for the high suicide rates. It's certainly not the only reason. But let's be honest for a minute here. If you are transgender and you come from a religious household, the same kind of household that we often hear about disowning their gay kids, is it so far-fetched to believe that these kinds of households refusing to accept and support a transgender teenager, even to the point of disowning them and kicking them out into the street, as we know has happened with gay teens, can we honestly rule out the possibility that this wouldn't push a kid to kill themselves? If you think that that's not possible, how do you explain the 2015 suicide of Leila Alcorn, who expressed her frustration with her parents who refused to consider the possibility that she was transgender and took her to a Christian therapist? Leila herself described these Christian therapists as very biased, and I don't doubt that they were. I don't think that a lack of support is the main reason, but I'm unwilling to rule it out as a contributing factor, and Shapiro and other right-wing speakers referring to it as absolute garbage shows just how little reading into the subject I've actually done. Now, the UCLA study that Shapiro mentioned is one that I've covered plenty of times in my videos, so the minute he said that it offered proof that trans people who are not questioned about being trans have the exact same rate of suicidality as those who are, I knew he was talking out of his arsehole. Significantly lower prevalence of suicide attempts were found among respondents who said people can never tell that they are transgender or gender non-conforming, and those who never tell anyone that they are transgender or gender non-conforming. Collectively, these findings suggest that not being recognised by others as trans or gender non-conforming may function as a protective factor for suicidal behaviour. Conversely, one's inability to not be recognised as trans or gender non-conforming may create added risk. The same study also states that respondents who experienced rejection by family and friends, discrimination, victimization or violence had elevated prevalence of suicide attempts. To state that the possibility that society and rejection could impact the suicide rates as absolute garbage is bullshit. To state that trans people who are not questioned about being trans have the exact same rate of suicidality as those who are is bullshit. I think sometimes people who consider themselves anti-SJW or who are opposed to political correctness, myself included, can be guilty of refusing to accept anything that is generally held up by SJWs and the far left as true to be true. And when I first got into an argument with a regressive over this issue, I refused to believe that the suicide rates were so high due to a lack of acceptance by society, simply because I didn't want to concede to this regressive that they were correct. That was unjustifiably petty of me, and the more reading that I've done on the topic, the more I've realised that just because the SJWs or regressives say something that is true doesn't automatically mean that we want to prove it false, or should want to prove it false. I've tried to remain as objective as possible on this topic, and by doing so I've had to concede now that there is evidence that suggests that not being accepted and supported can lead and has led transgender people to kill themselves. But this does not mean that we cannot remain cautious and insist that strict assessment must still be met in order to be officially diagnosed. And I think that's why this particular aspect of this topic makes people uncomfortable. People are concerned that if we concede that a lack of acceptance and support can lead to trans suicides, that we then must accept and support without question all people who claim to be trans, and this is just not the case. All people who claim to be trans should still be required to get an official diagnosis by a professional in order to commence with medical transition. If you are a parent, you should never accept or reject without question if your kid comes to you and says they think they may be trans. Research and the opinion of a professional should always come before your final decision. If someone is not trans, they do not suffer from gender dysphoria, but you embrace and support the idea and encourage them to go through with transition. When this person grows out of it and realises they have irreversibly altered their body because nobody thought to question them, they could be driven to suicide. If someone is genuinely trans and you reject them, that in itself may not push them to suicide, but for those who aren't going through a phase, who aren't just following fads, who are actually suffering from dysphoria, combine this with rejection, that could push them to suicide. These hypothetical scenarios wouldn't make you responsible for their death, but hopefully they provide you with some incentive to not just accept or reject the possibility that someone is trans just because it makes you uncomfortable.
What's making people suicidal is that this is a mental illness, and it is barbaric to suggest that a man can become a woman and a woman can become a man with a snip of the knife. It's horrifying, and it is mutilation, and it is brutal. And the people who are pushing this have no sympathy for the people who are actually suffering from it. They're forwarding mental illness. They're forwarding mental illness to kids because they want to teach this to children now. And this is one where you're on, I mean, these people, it is unbelievable to me that the left suggests that we're the party of anti-science. Okay, they are the party of vaccines are bad and men can magically become women through some magic man-to-woman machine.
Ben, you are tackling this issue as if all trans people are regressive, politically correct retards. I don't believe that men or women can magically become the opposite sex because I don't believe in magic or miracles. That would be anti-science. The same can't be said for you, Ben, a practicing Jew who celebrates Passover, which, for those of you who don't know, Passover commemorates the emancipation of the Israelites from slavery, and it gets its name from the belief that God passed over the Jewish homes while murdering all the Egyptian firstborns. Now, maybe Shapiro is one of the religious guys who practice their faith more out of tradition and don't actually believe in miracles. But in the event that he isn't, I resent being lectured by a religious guy on my beliefs as being anti-science when I can actually offer evidence that backs up my claims. A study from 2013 on regional grey matter structure differences between transsexuals and healthy controls supports the notion that structural differences do exist between subjects with gender identity disorder and controls from the same biological gender. They found that transsexual subjects did not differ significantly from controls sharing their gender identity, but were different from those sharing their biological gender in several areas. Do you think sitting someone down for a few counselling sessions and pumping them with antidepressants is going to change their situation? Support and transition for those who genuinely suffer from dysphoria is not unsympathetic and it's not anti-science. And for more information on studies of the transgender brain, please see my video, Sex Differences in the Transgender Brain, that I'll link below.
Right, because transgenderism suggests you don't have to make physical changes, you don't have to change your dress, you don't have to change anything. Right, if you just decide one day that if Charles Bronson one day decided to saunter on in, take off his gun belt, and mosey on in and sashay on in to the ladies' restroom for a little sitsy on the toilet, then he would be a woman. This is the way that this is. What I love about this particular debate is I think enough Americans are not insane.
Ben, when you and all the other conservative political commentators stop conflating transtrenders with transgender people, I will start to take your opinions on this particular topic a little more seriously. Stick to the topics you know. It's a shame to see someone so sharp sounding so fucking dull.